I would like to welcome everybody to the 2020 AFC Summit webinar series, proudly hosted by Nonotuck Resource Associates and the statewide AFC Roundtables. The AFC Roundtables meet regionally and virtually to continue the mission of the AFC Summit to learn, share, continue the dialogue between AFC organizations. This webinar is an adaptation of the annual AFC Summit typically held at Holy Cross College, and we thank each of you for staying connected virtually with us. And please look forward to future webinar opportunities. We've seen impressive registration rates this week through the webinar series with approximately 505 registrants. So we do anticipate continuing webinars in the future. You'll have two moderators for today, myself, Deb Schneer, and Carrie Parody, who will assist with question and answer throughout the presentation. We have a few brief instructions to participants. Many of you have attended throughout the week, but we do ask participants to remain muted throughout the presentation using the chat feature to ask questions throughout and periodically throughout the webinar. Your questions will be called upon. There's also a hand raise feature. If you hover down at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar in the participant icon, you can raise your hand and be called on by a moderator and unmuted. Today's webinar is also encouraging engagement from attendees. There will be a poll at one point during the webinar, and attendees will be asked to make a selection between two options. You'll be prompted by the presenter and you'll have a pop-up on your screen to do so. Following today's presentation, you'll receive an email with evaluation for today's webinar. You can follow the instructions in that email to return the evaluation to us. That feedback is very important. Without further delay, we'd like to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Jennifer Higgins, owner of Commonwealth Grant Works.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I am the owner of this new small business, providing grant writing services and consultant services in the Valley and across the state. I have a number of clients that range in budget size and employee size, budgets ranging from about 150,000 to 30 million or so. So a broad array of clients who actually work in a number of different fields, anywhere from behavioral health and substance use to PD services, as well as things like performing arts and therapeutic horseback riding, a variety of different topics that I cover. Just as way of background, let me go here. I have a doctorate in gerontology from UMass Boston. And for my dissertation, I wrote on problem gambling activities amongst older adults. And that was a nationwide survey that I conducted. So that was where I sort of launched my work with older adults and have a keen understanding of aging and the long-term care system. I have a career, also a side career in clinical research. So I worked in psychiatry and neurology, and a little bit of oncology as well in clinical research. And for those of you who don't know what clinical research is, it's much more medically based. So it's essentially testing different medication products at different phases in their development, either pre-approval or post-approval. So we were testing things like Namenda and other kinds of, and Aricept and other kinds of medications for Alzheimer's, as well as medications for psychiatry. I worked a number of years in compliance and quality assurance, and in that role, in addition to other activities, I conducted the first CARF survey for a large behavioral health agency in the Valley, and was lucky enough to get a 3-year CARF survey approval at that point, which was pretty exciting. And I enjoy that kind of work, the accreditation work, so I understand that as well. And in addition to all of this, and throughout my positions, I've been writing grants for more than 20 years. I would say that they sort of harken back to my days as a graduate student, and when we were looking for revenue for some of my research activities at UMass Boston. And a personal note, I should also say that I'm a bit of a fast talker. So if at any point you need me to slow down, repeat anything, please don't hesitate to interject and just speak up. Here's my website, the one of the pages of my website. So you can find me at www.commonwealthgrantworks.com. At this website, I provide an overview of grant writing, but also a bit about my process and my pricing philosophy. I really firmly believe that pricing should reflect the levels of income and the budget sizes of the organizations for which I work. So it's somewhat based on the percentage of a budget size. Is what my fees are, but you can learn a lot more about me and the process on my website. And I also wanted to instruct you to a free blog that I post generally once a month, not much more than that. I don't find it's useful, and I don't want to overburden people's inboxes. So if you would like to subscribe, I encourage you to do so. We talk about relevant topics. The last couple have been about COVID. And finding revenue opportunities in the era of COVID, and then thinking a little bit more about the near and long-term situation and climate for grants post-COVID. And I have a couple of pages of notes that I'm actually going to be referring to as we go through here. I hope that that's not hard for people to deal with. I encourage you to ask questions, as Deb said. It's going to be much better to be interactive if we are able to address questions. And I want people to know that this is relatively basic information and education about grant writing and searching for funding opportunities. So I hope that people will feel comfortable asking any questions, even if they feel to the asker as somewhat simple or silly. There's no silly question. So I hope that people will feel comfortable asking everything. So what's on the agenda for today? Today, we're going to, I'm going to explain a little bit about the sort of the title of today's presentation, which has two parts, and I'll explain what my thinking is about each of those parts. I will define what grants are and the role that they play for nonprofits. There is a for-profit opportunity in the world of grants, but I won't be addressing that today. And then we will review where to find grants. I'm going to go through a number of different places that you can look to find funding opportunities. And then we will discuss how to apply for applications and what to expect in response. So what's with the presentation title? Okay, so the presentation title has two parts. As you may recall, the presentation title is beginning with funding enhancements on a shoestring budget. And then subtitle is Grant Writing 101. So my purpose in having the two titles is that I wanted to really provide some basic education about grant writing for those of you who have little experience or who are intimidated by the possibility of writing a grant application. And then the second is to outline ways in which all of this can be done at minimal cost. And that's an important point to be made for nonprofits, which may have smaller budgets than a for-profit organization. So what are grants? So here's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and it's about nomenclature and naming conventions. The product you submit is actually an application. It's not a grant. I find that people use those terms interchangeably, and it's not exactly accurate. So what a grant is the act of receiving and the sum, the money or funding that you receive. Those equal a grant. The process of applying is an application. I also wanted to talk a little bit about grantee versus grantor for those of you who may not be familiar with those terms. A grantee is the one who receives the grant award, and the grantor is essentially the funder, the person or agency giving you that revenue. I wondered if it could be possible to raise your hand in the chat box or use the raise your hand feature and tell me how many of you have experience with grant writing. And I should say, and that's not a requirement that you do that, it's just going to help me if I can get that feedback from Deb or Carrie. It'll help gauge what I share in this presentation. And forgive me ahead of time if the presentation feels too basic. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm always available via email to talk about anything else that you wish had been covered. So what role do nonprofits play? Grants rather play for nonprofits. So my real thinking is that nonprofits, an essential part of what nonprofits do and their work and their funding streams should include grants and grant funding. So I firmly believe that it behooves a nonprofit to either embed a full-time grant writer or part-time grant writer in their team, or to contract out that work, which may seem too technical or too labor intensive for the team presently employed by a nonprofit. And this is especially true, I think, in today's world where the reimbursement structures are completely changing with managed care and value-based purchasing. So it's a little bit more precarious financially for organizations, and if they have additional revenue through grants, I think they are stead much better. And I do think grant writers are worth the investment. As I said, things can be done pretty modestly. As example, my budget, my personal income is rather modest, but I've raised at least $500 million for area nonprofits in the past several years. So that's a significant amount of revenue, and not to be cocky about that. I'm just showing you that it's a small fraction of the expense, and then you get that much greater benefit for that investment. And I'm sorry, I did want to say that I really think that grants should be only a portion, or should be some portion of an annual budget rather. Typically, grants constitute very little of a nonprofit's financial ties. And this is interesting to me because I was looking at this during the COVID era and realizing how little folks have in additional resources, or nonprofits have in additional resources to rely on at precarious at times when there may be emergencies or pandemics like we've just had. Local agencies, particularly those like yourself at Nonotuck and other providers of either AFC or DDS services or Mass Health Services, most of their budgets come from, and I would say up to 98%, come from state contracts. And that's different from a grant. When I speak about grants, I'm talking about discretionary income that may be obtained through a private foundation, for instance. So state contracts that are held generally for people who provide AFC services are in the area of DDS, Mass Health, and perhaps Department of Public Health, depending on the kinds of services that they provide at their agencies. Those are pretty much the primary funding sources. Oh, and excuse me, DMH as well. So it's surprising to me that local agencies' budgets are really only comprised, grants really only comprise about 1 to 2% of their overall budget, which is striking to me. So when we talk about a sort of a healthy budget, here's what I would say is the real goal of a nonprofit to strive to achieve something like this in terms of blended funding streams. So here I've got a reduction in the total amount of contracts. An AFC is a contract essentially with the state. So that would really be more ideally about 60% of the budget if we're going to move towards a blended funding stream. Grants, I would recommend be more about 20% or a quarter of the budget, which would be great. What I'm calling donations are individual donations, or things that you may receive during an annual appeal letter, or private donations by families and caregivers or individuals served who may be providing some additional revenue for the agency. And then about 10% for program or participant fees. These would be stipends that individuals may have to pay. It could be rent subsidies that are paid. It could be, for instance, if there's a program that individuals like to take advantage of that is somewhat special, such as a yoga class or an exercise program or something like that, there might be a program fee levied. So that's really what I would consider a healthy budget pie for a nonprofit. But what we're seeing is more like this, where it's about 95% contracts and about 5% for fees, and 0 grants, which is surprising to me. And I think that trend is starting to change. There are some agencies that do raise a considerable amount of money through grant applications. So I think the trend is starting to shift a little bit away from the contract. And I think a prime example, as I mentioned earlier, is that COVID really demanded multiple revenue streams, because when the state contracts were either held at bay or reduced as a result of COVID, the agencies that I was working with nearly went bust. They really required some additional emergency funding at the state level in order to continue to provide the services and keep the contracts moving forward. So again, I'm saying a diversification of the funding streams is ideal for dealing with rainy day funds and dealing with situations of downturn. But because grants are discretionary and it's completely up to the funder to decide whether they want to continue funding you or not, that is a bit risky, and you can't always rely on them exclusively, of course, but they do contribute to the budget. So where do you find grant opportunities? In my thinking, here are the major sources of grant opportunities: charitable foundations, local governmental agencies, state governmental agencies, and federal governmental agencies. And I'm going to go into each one of them in a bit more detail so you can see how you would approach each of these different bodies and the methods you would use to apply. So for charitable foundations, I'm going to use an example of the Foundation Directory Online, and many of you may have already heard of this for those of you who have been writing grants. It's quite commonly used, but some little known other opportunities are provided through listservs, that is email distribution lists that you can get your name put on and freely receive notifications about opportunities. So here's a snapshot of the Foundation Directory Online's website. And you can see here, that there are different ways in which you can search. So you can search by an organization if you happen to know the funder's name. You can search by the region, for instance, or for instance, if you're looking for someone who funds in Massachusetts. It's surprising because sometimes funders of Massachusetts programs have ties to our state but don't live here or are not based here. So you might find a Floridian foundation that has preferential treatment of Massachusetts providers and applicants. So don't be dissuaded by the fact that some organizations are outside of our state. As I said, many of them have ties. So based on a search that I conducted using the term subject area health, the geographic focus, as I said, where they will provide funding to agencies, the population served, and here I put people with disabilities and adults, although these can be broken down even more finely. I just wanted to show you the staggering number of grant makers, funders that popped up when I just put in that basic search. So let's talk a little bit about what you find here when you're using Foundation Directory Online or some other kind of database service. You see here that there were 3,365 foundations found in providing support for Massachusetts providers in the areas of health and aging as those subject areas. So at that point, you need to then look more closely at the amount that they're funding, the amount that they have funded over the course of the year. So we've got 10 million for the Boston Foundation, 10 million and change, 1 million for the Bank of America Foundation, And then you can see the grant count on the far right. So this is the total number of grants that they have allocated in the last year. So for instance, the Boston Foundation has given out 896 grants. Those are ways of improving your odds by going for a foundation that offers not only more revenue, but a greater number of applications are awarded. That improves your odds considerably. So it's something to consider. And I think that's good. I think I'll pause now to see if there are any questions thus far. Carrie or Deb, are there any questions thus far?
I actually had a question, but I wanted to let you know just some of the feedback that we received. It looks like most people are brand new to grant writing. Someone has had a one time got an art grant, and I had a question about this grant count. Is each one of these, the amount funded, was that 10 million plus, or that's the total amount that was given to these 896?
No, actually the 10 million is the amount funded, but that's likely to be an average. The total giving was 130 million.
Okay.
Do you see the total giving there?
Yeah.
And then the total assets you can see are much greater than the total giving. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And
no, that's great. That's a very good question. And looking at these numbers, they're so large. They're hard, not necessarily easy to get your head around. So then I didn't show it here, but if you scroll down, so say you got to the 30,001 3001 grant maker, you might find that their total giving is $200, and they give it all to one agency once a year. So there's a wide variety of the giving levels, but I just wanted to show people what was possible to find here.
And there's a question about, are these online directories free?
Oh, that's a very good point. It's a bit about you get what you pay for. Foundation Directory Online is probably the most expensive and most costly, and it does require a fee. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I want to say $40 a month, $50 a month, something like that. There are price breaks if you pay annually or for a multi-year subscription, but there are lots of other ways of doing things more economically, such as the listservs that I just mentioned, which you can get on to. In a moment, I'm going to talk about Commbuys in the state system and ways that you'll find out about opportunities in the state, and then federal opportunities. There are listservs for those as well, and those are free. But it is a bit about you get what you pay for. So these are much more robust. The Foundation Directory Online is much more robust as a tool for finding grants. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about local, those are charitable. We're going to talk a little bit about local grants. And very briefly, because they don't provide much in the way of revenue for nonprofits or even for-profits. So there are different types, and I don't know if some people have heard about the Community Development Block Grant. It's actually funding that comes through the state, and it's given to the towns to allocate. Often they're tied to historical property improvements or those kinds of projects, but sometimes there are social service programs that are provided funding through the CDBG monies. And again, the town would be announcing an opportunity to apply. These are, they're challenging applications. They usually require a lot of detail work and supporting documentation. But if you plan ahead, I think they're quite doable. I would say they usually give you about 30 days to turn around an application from when the city or town announces its availability. So you just have to be ready to go. And sometimes you can know a little bit in advance of that opening date about what's going to be made available. And the way in which you might know that is because towns and cities often go through an every other year cycle. So for 1 year, they may be offering capital funding. So you could purchase a van, you might build an ADA compliant ramp for your nonprofit. Those types of projects are capital. But for programming, it might be something like a youth program in a community. It might be something for senior citizens. And those are the kinds of like programs that you would get funded through the CDBG money or other types of town funding. These are also offered on a seasonal basis. Generally, it's about once a year, and they're usually about the same time every year for that town. So some towns are on a spring cycle, and then they grant you the revenue in the summer months. Some are on a fall cycle, where your application is due in the fall, and then you receive your funding in the spring. State agencies. So this is the view of the front page of Commbuys. And for those of you who are not familiar with Commbuys, it's an online procurement system that the state uses for any grants and contracts that it has with a vendor. So it links these purchasers with these opportunities in the system for which you create a quote and submit a bid. And I'll explain a bit more about what each of those terms mean. But this is the website you would use to find Commbuys. It's free. I did say that already. So here's a couple of definitions about, and the reason I'm talking a little bit more about Commbuys is because nonprofits in the state of Massachusetts rely heavily on this system. So if you are interested in doing grant writing and want to benefit your nonprofit, this is where you would want to focus your attention. So this is a complex system, but it's manageable once you understand the way in which it works. And it's really a significant revenue source for the state nonprofits in Massachusetts. So the seller, they have complicated terms for everything they do in Commbuys. And here's where I'm going to send you this handout with useful definitions and terms that are used through the Commbuys system, and that will be sent to you after this presentation. But for this presentation, for the sake of today, I just wanted to go through a couple of things. So the seller is really the role that the vendors use to access the system and submit a request for a bid. Open bids are those that allow any vendor to submit a response. And there's a certain period of time that you're allowed to submit a response. Once it closes, that is what's known as the bid opening date, which is a little counterintuitive. You just have to commit to understanding that and thinking that way. But Commbuys and the state call bid opening dates. This is the due date. The bid opening date is the due date. So if it said March 30th, 2021, that's the date in which it had to be completely uploaded by. And they usually give you a time. It's like 5 p.m. on the 30th of the 2021 date. And then quotes. Quotes are the actual documents that you use to respond to the solicitation opportunities. And quotes will include all of the application materials that they have posted on Commbuys that have to be completed, filled out. There might be a narrative section that's required. You would save that in a PDF and upload that as well. But they all have different instructions. Different departments have different instructions. So I then wanted to talk about the way in which you search in Commbuys. So Commbuys, again, it takes a little bit of familiarity with it, playing around. They call the departments in the state organizations in Commbuys. So there's a little caret drop down here. You can see I could have selected any number of state departments. I could have selected Elder Affairs. I could have selected Mass Health is different because it goes through the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. So your AFC programs are actually released information about through the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, which oversees Mass Health. But for the sake of today, I just picked Department of Public Health. I should also mention that with Commbuys, you can start your work and save it and then come back later and finish. So for instance, if you have entered all of the materials that you had ready to go and you were waiting on a signature document, a signed document, you could upload that later and then press submit. And what I'm not going to be able to go into today, but what there is available in this presentation is a video about Commbuys and how to withdraw a quote that you've submitted. So if you make an error, for instance, you can go ahead and withdraw it, make the correction, and then put it back uploaded to Commbuys. Let's go on to the bid opening date. So over here on the right, that's the bid opening date, as I just mentioned. And if you drop down to the one that I've highlighted, the Healthcare Professionals for Expert Witness Services, which is an RFR, a request for response, and a grant application opportunity, that is the bid opening date, which is the deadline, is 6/30/2029, which is crazy to see a 30-year contract. But what that means is it's a rolling contract, and they'll accept applications up until that date of 2029. Many of them are 30 to 60-day periods of application, but I just thought I would share that with you, that some of them are rolling. Over here on the left, you'll see the bid number, and that's terribly important for finding things in Commbuys. So if you're given a bid number, it'll save you a lot of time trying to search the system to find that opportunity. And I should say also that there are program officers for each of these bids. Here you see David Harvey is the one I've noted here for the professional expert witnesses. You can speak to him and write to him or other program officers regarding this RFR and this application opportunity only during a specific period of time. It actually is a violation if you reached out to him beyond the date that he's permitted to answer questions. So that's terribly important to keep in mind. I wanted to also talk about it's a very unwieldy system, but if you have the bid number, it's much easier to work through it. And here's where I'm going to ask, and I don't think we're going to have time for this, but we'll go ahead and do the poll just in case. I was hoping people could choose between video 1 or video 2, both of which are embedded in this PDF, so this PowerPoint, so you can watch them on your own. The first is how to search for bids in Commbuys, and the second is how to create a quote. And I'll just wait a few minutes to see what people want to view, should we have time.
Jennifer, while people are polling, I did have a question about the Commbuys. Do they explain the grant amounts like the FDO one showed the grant amounts? Is that part of Commbuys as well?
Many of them do, unless they are a blanket contract or they are fee-for-service based. So that would mean it would be tied to a rate. So if you serve one person and that person comes with a $25 an hour rate through the regulations, that would be the amount you could expect based on the number of people that you will be serving and the number of hours served. Many of them do list the upper ceiling of their awards. So for instance, it might be that you get $400,000 for a 1-year contract, and that is a 10-year plan, a 10-year award, then that would be the $4 million. So you can figure out based on the length of the contract and grant, and then the upper amount that they're offering. So are we sure? It looks like we have a winner maybe with video 2.
Yeah, video 2, it looks like. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we can get rid of that now. Let me go on. I want to touch on federal grants before. Oops, stop share results. How do I get rid of it? I'll just close it maybe, or. Okay, so we'll go on to federal grants. Oop, now my thing's not working. Did I lose the ability to go forward? Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't know what happened there. So here are the videos I was hoping to share with you. This is some additional information I'm not going to go into right now, but it's in there for you to review on your own. And this is, as I explained, you can withdraw a quote before the deadline and make any changes you want. So a bit about the federal grant system, which is grants.gov. This is also a free system, and I'm showing you here a basic search that I conducted. And I was only interested in the ones that are presently open, so I checked forecasted and posted, meaning those announcements had been posted. I used the search term older adults, again, thinking that that might be something akin to what folks are doing And you can see here that I got a few hits. There's an opportunity for engaging older adults, which we'd have to read to learn more about. There's one about balance in older adults, which is a hot topic. Person-centered trauma-informed care with older adults and caregivers. Oral health. There's a variety of things here that are opportunities that people could apply for. I find that Commbuys, both Commbuys and grants.gov have excellent help desk services. So if you ever had trouble searching the unwieldy systems, you can call each of those help desks, and they're very helpful and can save you a lot of time. Again, on the right, you'll see the close date. They don't call it a bid opening date. The grants.gov system calls it a close date, so it's a little clearer. And that engaging older adults would be due 5/29 of 2020. A bit more on federal grants. They're highly competitive, and many times you'll find that they only are looking for one award across the whole country. So you can imagine if 300, 400, 500 agencies apply, the odds of getting it are very little or few. So I also should say that they generally require robust data that you demonstrated that your project has had impact previously. So what you would do in that case is conduct a pilot study of your idea and collect those data over a year or two, and then submit for an opportunity that seemed appropriate and would fund your project in a greater amount. I should say these are also much more lucrative than state and local opportunities. So sometimes it's worth the effort of going for a bigger one, even though the odds are few or low. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I want to keep plugging along. Carrie and Deb, do I have anything else to address yet?
No, you're good to go.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about AFC specific opportunities. So these are, they are plentiful if you know where to look and if you can get creative in your search. So I did a search in the, I guess I used one of my database systems, the charitable foundation systems, and I used search terms like aging, older adults, seniors, disability, housing. Those are the kinds of large keywords I used. And you can find programmatic support very easily for things like the match time it takes to make the AFC match, any transportation that you're providing for either individuals served or family members, caregivers. You can find support for training and recreation if people want to go on outings. Those are the kinds of things that charitable foundation money would be able to support. So in my search, I found a number at the bottom here that would fit these keyword descriptions. And I wanted to call your attention to the bonus, which is the Bader Philanthropies. That deadline is July 2nd. So I was going to suggest that you all go for it and try to apply this knowledge by applying for that one. It's not a very in-depth application. It would be a nice way to start. You can also find opportunities for AFC programming through Commbuys, as I mentioned before. Again, it would be looking at the organization level of Executive Office of Human Services, Health and Human Services, which posts the Mass Health program opportunities. And then you could also check with the Commbuys help desk if you wanted to get any notices that come out from EOHHS, for instance, or any other organization in the Commbuys system. You can ask them to set you up to get them by email right to your inbox. And that comes anytime a new announcement is made about an opportunity. Saves a lot of time. I find that I'm finding out stuff before other people even find it, so it gives you a leg up. And of course, there are other ways of getting revenue for the AFC kinds of programming. For instance, there's a new community transit grant program being offered right now through Mass Department of Transportation. And those are offering new vehicles. So if there were a need for a van for a program, for instance, or for an agency, it's a very beneficial way of getting, it's not entirely free, the van, but it's very close to being free. There are other ways in which you can get some revenue for training programs, some safety training, maybe CPR for your staff or for caregivers. And then through the Mass Rehabilitation Commission, you might also find opportunities for assistive technologies or assistive or adaptive equipment that could be used by individuals served. So those are some examples of the way in which you could be creative with what's out there. And I should say everyone is eligible to apply to these opportunities back here at MassDOT and Department of Labor. But sometimes not only nonprofits can apply, but for-profits and even individuals are sometimes eligible to apply for opportunities. So you just have to check and see who's eligible. There's the eligibility criteria listed for every opportunity. So how do you apply? Well, you need to follow the instructions very closely in the announcement. So sometimes foundations and others will want you to apply online. Some want it by email, or very few, but common among foundations, charitable foundations, especially long-standing ones that are family foundations, will want you to submit a hard copy via mail. So you need to factor that into before the deadline. It needs to be in their hands by a certain deadline. My suggestion is to develop a work plan and the task timeline right away. Who's going to do what and when those things are due. And then with respect to the writing, it's revise, revise, revise. Make sure it's the best writing that you possibly can manage. And if you're using multiple writers, which is common amongst nonprofits, be sure that the final narrative or the final draft is in one literary voice. So that is all present or all past tense, and similar kinds of references to activities, or just make sure that everything is consistent throughout. Consistency is important. There are lots of other signatory forms and budget forms that come with applications, particularly federal and state ones. This is a federal form that's quite common, the SF 424. It seems more daunting than it is, but all of these take ample time. So I say leave as much time as possible to get everything complete for applications. Oh, I should also say with the grants.gov system, they ask you to apply a week in advance of the deadline. And that is because there often are technical glitches. And there's also a problem with their system, I find. It creates errors if you, and sends you error messages. So in completing an online application through grants.gov, you might get as many as 25 error messages that all have to be rectified before you can proceed to submit. So that all takes a lot of time. I was sad to hear that an agency I was familiar with missed a large opportunity because they failed to do these error validation steps in time. So they literally ran out of time to submit it and had done all of the work of writing and getting everything ready beforehand. So word of caution is to have everything done as early as possible, and with federal grants a week in advance. Let's talk a little bit about what your odds are. I mentioned that they can be improved in various ways. Statistics and research show that there's about a 10% of getting funding. So that is for every 10 applications you submit, you might get one. My work in the Valley, though, has really shown that this may not really be an accurate statistic any longer. My return on investment is closer to 30%. So for every 10 applications I submit, I'm likely to get 2 or 3. That is quite a substantial difference from the 10% return on investment. But one rule of thumb I have to say with grant writing is to be persistent and very thick-skinned. Everyone's a critic. Everyone can do it better than you can in their mind, and they're going to tell you that. You just have to be persistent and keep applying. That's what I would suggest. The persistent people will prevail. Let's talk a little bit about grant writing etiquette. So it's important to make sure that there's a goodness of fit between what you're asking for and the funding opportunity being made available. Review the eligibility criteria carefully, because sometimes there are things like, that you wouldn't expect. For instance, one just came around from the state recently, and it was awarded to gateway cities only, which included cities like Springfield, Holyoke, Greenfield, and towns such as Amherst, Longmeadow, Agawam, South Hadley were not considered gateway cities. So those were excluded. So it would be important to know that you would be excluded for those kinds of, from applying for those kinds of opportunities. So just pay attention to the eligibility criteria before wasting your time on getting an application ready. And then call ahead if permitted to do so. A lot of, I said, family foundations don't have a web presence, so you might run the risk of phoning them when they have preferred not to be phoned. Of course, you can't really control that if they don't have a way of searching that out on the web. But whenever it is permitted, I suggest calling in advance to make sure that they are welcoming of your application. It's a nice way to start building rapport. Follow their instructions carefully and exactly. Don't deviate at all from that. They don't have much tolerance for that. And then again, plan ahead so you don't miss any deadlines. And then graciously accept the award or declination. Sometimes many times you'll be declined, but you just be gracious about it. And if you're declined, I always recommend requesting a debriefing to learn how you can improve upon your application and perhaps even resubmit. And sometimes I call them favorable denials. Sometimes you get a denial that says, we didn't have enough funding this year, but we'd love for you to reapply next year. So I keep those in a separate folder and reapply for clients if I receive a favorable denial. Okay, so you received the award, now what? A particularly difficult part of grant work is paying close attention to the award and tracking the awards. So the letters of agreement or the signed award that you receive will usually stipulate what the requirements of it are. So for instance, you might have to make a mid-year report, or there might need to be an annual evaluation provided, or an annual report, some method of communicating to the funder the outcomes of your project. Tracking the awards is very burdensome. I won't lie about that. It's usually best done in like an Excel worksheet or through some sort of grants management software system. And if possible, I would suggest, if you're submitting a lot of applications and it's hard to keep track of the awards, I would suggest having a dedicated staff member or someone on their team charged with that responsibility of tracking it, because it gets really crazy when you have all these deadlines and all of these mid-year reports that are due, or whatever the requirements are. It's hard to track them all. And then sing the praises of your funder whenever you can. This is best done through like a check presentation. If you are awarded an opportunity or a grant, just schedule a check presentation inviting the funder to come out and have the media present. Post on your social media page broadly about the award, anything you can do to incorporate it into your annual report. And even at live events, you might have a banner or a pop-up banner or some sort of notice in a program booklet, some way of recognizing the funder again is always a good idea. And then again, I would say, in terms of connecting with continuing connection with the funder, invite them for a site visit with clients or families or beneficiaries of the award. Of course, you need to be careful about getting a media consent, media release form signed for any confidentiality issues, but it's always good for them to see how their money is being used in a productive and positive way, and the impact it's having on you and the people that you serve. And then sending occasional note cards or holiday cards just to keep them you in their thoughts is really what it's about. And then keep as close contact as possible with them. So I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time for the video as I had thought I would. I'm running close to time, or do I have more time? It's about a 10-minute video, Deb. I don't know if that's something we should do, or just address questions.
You have until 10 after 1, so if you
we can do it. Oh, great.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
There are a couple of quick questions, I think.
Oh, sure.
Yep. So there was a question about if you reapply, do you have to do a different write-up?
It really depends on the feedback you might have gotten from the denial. For instance, and perhaps even a debriefing that you might have with them to learn about what you did that that was not to their liking, or maybe it was just that they just didn't have the revenue. So in those cases, if they say to you, we didn't have the revenue this year to fund everybody we wanted to fund, in that case, you would not really have to do much to the application. However, if they say to you, these are areas that needed to be strengthened, you didn't explain how you're going to evaluate your program clearly, then you might have to rework it. It really depends on the outcome that you receive from the funder.
And I actually had a question as to if you think the pandemic is going to affect grants being awarded or people's ability to continue to offer those grants.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you, I had been doing a lot of thought about that myself, and really encouraging my clients to start thinking about the mid to longer term picture. What it's going to mean, I think there was a significant amount of money dumped into nonprofits and others right now during the pandemic. And that revenue was probably money that could have been used next year and will likely not appear next year. So I'm encouraging clients, and even the work that I do, to identify alternative sources of funding. So that is finding new charitable foundations that they can approach. It's not exactly clear yet what it's going to look like, but I do think that the money that has been allocated through the Community Foundation and other major funders in the Valley, that money will likely not be as readily available next year, I think is really what's going to happen. So being strategic and thinking about new pockets of revenue would be smart.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm glad we have time for the video that people wanted. Now let me see how I can go back. Let's see. Okay, so we wanted the second one. 1, 2, how to create a quote in Commbuys. All right, so let's see. I hope there are no, if we run out of time and if there are further questions. Oh, one thing I wanted to share with you. Oh dear, I have to do this quickly before I have a winner opportunity. So I was hoping that everybody who attended today's presentation who had interest in winning these earbuds could send me an email to my personal email address, which is right here at the very end. I mean, my work address, and give me your mailing address, and I will randomly pick a winner from those that contact me and send out the earbuds. So I thought that was a fun little thing to do for the end of our day together. Okay, so here's how to create a quote in Commbuys.
Welcome to How to Create a Quote in Commbuys webcast. This webcast is for vendors who are interested in submitting a quote response to a bid solicitation opportunity in the Commbuys Market Center. To submit an online quote, you must be registered in Commbuys. If the bid provides alternative submission instructions, you will find them in the Request for Response, or RFR. For links to related content and policy explanations, see the description below the YouTube playback area. This webcast is being brought to you by the Operational Services Division of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This presentation demonstrates the following tasks: locate a bid solicitation, review the bid solicitation, create a quote and upload attachments, and finally, submit a quote. It is the responsibility of the seller to read the RFR in its entirety and submit a completed response to the buyer by the close date. In Commbuys, the close date or deadline for submitting a response is known as the bid opening date and is managed by the Commbuys clock. The webcast Basic Commbuys Navigation for the seller role provides more information about the Commbuys clock. Be sure to read through all the documents to get information on the bid solicitation. Follow the instructions for submitting forms and attachments, and always review your documents prior to uploading and submitting. It is recommended to upload documents well in advance of the bid opening date. This will help reduce disqualified submissions that can occur if upload is not fully completed or if an attachment is missing at the deadline. Before you submit a quote, be prepared. Create a folder that is bid specific. on your desktop, network drive, or other location that suits the business. Here you can download and save bid-related documents as they are completed. This makes it easier to find and upload. Uploading the attachments in Commbuys can be done well in advance of the bid opening date. Upload attachments as soon as they are complete. It is not necessary to upload all attachments at the same time. The Commbuys clock prevents additional upload and quote submissions after the bid opening date. This includes quote submission in process. Incomplete submissions will be disqualified. Complete required documents as indicated by the RFR and follow file size and word number limits for attachments and answers. Save documents using any special naming instructions indicated in the RFR. On the header bar, click the settings icon and select Advanced Search. From the Advanced Search screen, choose Bids from the Document Type drop-down. Enter the last 5 digits of the bid number you received in an email notification and click Find It. Click the bid number hyperlink to access the details of the solicitation. Before you can view or respond to a bid opportunity, you will be asked to acknowledge receipt of the bid. In this acknowledgement, you agree to receive any future correspondence regarding this solicitation. If you select No, you may still view the bid, but you will not receive any notifications regarding updates or amendments, and you will not be able to respond to the bid. In order to create a quote, click Yes. Once you've acknowledged receipt of a bid, you are able to view header information, which includes the bid solicitation number, name of the purchaser, department, contact for this bid, type of purchase, pre-bid conference details, if applicable, ship to and bill to addresses, the bid available date, the date the solicitation was posted in Commbuys, and the bid opening date, the date the bid closes and no further quotes will be accepted. The bid opening date is managed by the Commbuys clock, so for any quotes that have missing attachments or quotes submitted after, the system clock will disable the quote submission process and the response will be disqualified. The File Attachments section lists all attachments related to the bid. The RFR gives full detail about the solicitation, such as essential bid terms, evaluation criteria, submission instructions, etc. Other files may include response forms or templates, supplier diversity.
Oh, sorry. Oh dear. Oh dear, what did I do?
I think if you just hit play again down the,
Okay.
the bottom, it should start right back up.
So sorry.
The item information section provides details about the specific goods and services the bid is requesting. When you are ready to begin your response, click the Create Quote button on the bid solicitation. The Create Quote link opens a new quote and brings you to the first step of submitting a quote. The screen opens to an 8-tab quote response record. It is the bidder's responsibility to go through each tab for information and instruction. The General tab is populated with some information from the bid. Fields with an asterisk must be completed. Read the bid documents carefully for instructions and fill in only those fields that are applicable to the bid to which you are responding. Whether changes are made or not, click Save and Continue to create a quote number. After saving, you will automatically receive system-generated error messages at the top of the screen. The messages in red must be addressed prior to submission. The yellow message displayed is a warning message indicating that the quote is not yet submitted. Not to worry at this time, let's continue with our quote creation. The quote now has a system-generated quote number. The Items tab shows information about the requested items. To view additional details or instructions for an item, click the item number. Looking at the row from left to right related to that item, if there are questions related to the item, it will be indicated with yes in the Questions Exist column. Quantity for the number of items wanted. The UOM, or unit of measure, determine how the goods or services is measured. For example, each, daily, weekly, etc. Unit cost for each item, discounts provided, tax rate is not applicable, freight charges, if any. Be sure to refer to the RFR for instructions on filling in these fields. The no bid box is checked. This is a default setting. The RFR will tell you to either select no charge or enter a price in the unit cost box or select See Quote Attachments. Either option selected will uncheck the no bid box. Only leave the no bid box checked if you are not submitting a quote for that item. The Questions tab may have questions that must be answered. If the questions are marked as required, they have to be answered before you can submit your quote. You can copy the questions and prepare the answers in a Word or Notepad document, and then copy and paste the answers into Commbuys. After answering the questions, click Save and Continue. This tab is different from the Bid Q&A tab. The job aid, using the Q&A tab within a Commbuys bid, provides guidance. The terms and conditions must be accepted before the quote can be submitted. Select the Yes radio button to accept the terms and conditions as detailed in the attached documents listed here. These are the same documents in the bid solicitation. As mentioned before, it is very important to read these attachments because they will be incorporated into the final contract if your business is awarded. Next to the Yes button is Yes with exceptions. If your acceptance is subject to any exceptions, those exceptions must be identified in this tab. Exceptions to the Terms and Conditions tab will undergo legal review, but may result in the disqualification of your submission. In order to complete a quote submission, you must indicate whether you accept the terms or not. Either way, you will not be able to select the Submit Quote option on the Summary tab without making a selection. Click Save and Continue. The Attachment tab allows the bidder to upload files and forms. These are documents related to the bid that you have completed and need to attach to your response. Examples may be bidder's response sheet, price list, supplier diversity plan forms, and others. The RFR may specify how documents are to be uploaded, either as individual files or as a zipped file. Before uploading or adding files, you must complete them according to the instructions in the RFR. You will be given specific naming instructions and the required format in which the file should be saved. If all your files are saved in a bid-specific folder, it will be easier to retrieve and upload them. To add a file, click the Add File button. On the Add File screen, there are two fields with asterisks. These must be populated. Name. This is the display name for the file that will appear when posted. It can be different from its saved location name and contain up to 200 characters. Clicking the Browse button accesses the location of the file to be uploaded. The description field allows you to describe the file. This may be an optional field. For all fields on this screen, follow the RFR instructions. Selecting the confidential box does not accept materials from the public records law after the bid process is concluded. Mark only those documents confidential which are not subject to the Massachusetts public records law. For example, those containing your tax ID or bank account information. Click Save and Exit to continue. A hyperlink to the file is displayed. If you click the hyperlink, you will be able to open and view the attachment. The number of uploaded files appears here. To add additional files, click the Add File button and repeat the process. When upload is complete, click Save and Continue. To remove an attachment, check the Delete box and click Save and Continue. From the Summary tab, be sure to review your quote before submitting. Are the item details entered? Are the required files uploaded in the requested format? Are the required questions answered? After review, click the Submit Quote button for your quote response to be reviewed and evaluated. A dialog box appears asking, "Are you sure you want to submit this quote?" Click OK. After submitting your response, a confirmation of receipt email will be sent to the email address in the vendor account. This email confirms that your response is fully submitted. OSD offers lots of resources. Our webpage, www.mass.gov/OSD, is a great place to start to learn about our executive agency procurement. The Commbuys Help Desk is available by phone or email. Our training department offers instruction in a variety of formats: workshops, live webinars, and pre-recorded webcasts found here in our YouTube channel.
Well, that is great. I'm glad we were able to view that. I'm just going to open it up to questions at this point. Anybody have any additional questions, especially after watching the video?
So there was a question about the video we didn't get to watch. Is that link there as well, so people could watch it at a later time?
Yeah, there are 3 videos in the PowerPoint, and the links are, if you have trouble with the embedded video, the link is below, pasted in below on the page, so you could use that hyperlink. The videos were about searching for bids. You just watched how to submit a quote for a bid, and the last is how to withdraw, revise, and resubmit a bid. So there's 3, which I find to be the most essential when learning the Commbuys system. And they're all in the PowerPoint, yes.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So I guess we are all set. I was going to ask if there were any other questions. I guess I'm going to give you back 2 minutes of your day.
Sure. So we'll leave it open another minute or so for questions. And it looks like we just got one question come in asking if you can search by region.
Searching in Commbuys by region?
Correct.
No, that is not to my knowledge. Is there a way to do that? You really have to, everything is tied to that bid number. But it will tell you in the bid description whether it would be for a particular region. So for instance, it might be the Southeast region, the Central West, and that would tell you in the RFR description on the page. But to my knowledge, there's no way to search by region. It's by organization/department or by bid number.
There's also a question about, can you do one write-up and use it to apply for a few grants, or do they need to all be unique from one another?
No, in fact, what's a great idea, especially for charitable foundations, well, for any of them actually, is to create sort of a boilerplate concept paper, like a 3 to 5 page paper, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on what is required. But I generally have that, ready to go, and you might just be able to cut and paste some parts of it, or use some of it for multiple applications. The only danger I find in doing that is if you get funded by several different funders for the same exact project, it's hard to justify to those 3 funders who funded you how you're going to make your project unique, given that you are locked into what you said you would do. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's one danger to that approach, but it is efficient.
And I just want to confirm, so there was a question that your email is included in this presentation, correct?
Yes, the very last page.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure. Oh, here it is. Show you.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. This has been a blast.